All right, so you're welcome to today's episode of Africa Talks Tech. So we have a very exciting guest on our show today, and his name is Marlon Parker. And Sam, what are we going to be discussing with Marlon on the show today?
So, on the show today, I'm going to borrow from what we know about Marlon. We're going to talk about it. Now, we would expand on it as we get on with this show, but the topic is African driven reconstructed living through innovation with Marlon Parker. And without much of ado, kick back, relax, and listen to this really innovative, creative speaker and social entrepreneur all the way from Cape Town, South Africa.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's episode of Africa Talks Tech. So, we've got a very interesting guest on the show with us today, Marlon. But first of all, let's introduce ourselves. So, my name again is Kazeem Adegwega. So, I'm based here in Nigeria. And of course, I don't do this alone. So, I've got my very good friend and partner on the show with me. So, it's over to you, Sam.
Oh, hi, and I'm Sam Erskine. I'm based in the UK, but originally I'm rooted in West Africa next to my brother Kazeem in Nigeria. And looking forward to chatting to Marlon, who's our special guest today. So, Kazeem, what are we going to be talking about today?
Yes, today we're going to be talking about African driven constructed living through innovation, is all we're going to be talking about today. And I think, we can't get any better guest on the show than to have Marlon himself, tell us about the RLab story. So we're going to be listening from Marlon about the RLab stories today on the show.
Excellent. So, first and foremost, Marlon, I believe it's Marlon Parker. Um, Welcome to the show. I would like to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what drove you into a tech career to begin with?
Thank you so much, Kazeem and Sam, for having me here. It's good to be on the show. And what a pleasure to really just be kind of sharing a little bit about the RLabs journey. So I had a very interesting journey coming into technology. Maybe just a little bit of background. So I was born in a place called Cape Town, but specifically on the Cape Flats in Cape Town. So if you think about the Cape Flats is a community where there's a lot of socio-economic challenges. And my journey started with a single mom who really, none of my family has ever seen or worked on computers before. And I basically completed school, and after school, I found myself um, working as pushing a shopping cart, like a trolley, as we would call it here. So I was a trolley boy, where people would give me tips so that I could help the family, because we grew up in what I would have classified as urban poor. And basically kind of did that job for about two years. So I'm very good at pushing trolleys. Um, but it wasn't my dream. My dream, like a lot of young people on the continent, we all have big dreams. And my dream was a small dream. My dream was that one day I want to have a job where I can wear a shirt and a tie. That was it. Because people that I thought wear shirts and ties are very important people. And I remember applying for a job to work in an office. And I was so confident that I was going to get this job that was, that I told myself, if I don't get this job, I'm going to go and I'm going to basically go and study something. And unfortunately for me, it happened that I was told that I'm not going to get the job. And the worst part is I was so confident that I bought myself a bright red tie and a white shirt, because I thought if I get this job, then I'm gonna go to office, wearing a shirt and a tie. And there I was deciding I'm gonna stop doing this and I'm gonna go and study. And at the time I saved up about $50, which was enough money for me to go and apply like an application fee at a institution. And I remember, look, as I was walking, thinking, what am I going to go and study? A lady stopped me and she was working as a waitress. And she says, Marlon, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I've just finished my job. I'm going to go and study something. And then she said, you know, if you want to study something, why don't you go and do it? I'm like, what? She said, no, man, study it. And I asked her, like, what is it? And she said she don't know, but she was serving a table, and the people at the table was talking about it all the time. And I asked her, what does this it stand for? And she says, information technology. And she says, Marlon, they spoke so much about it. It must be something that's important. Now, this is back in the late 90s, right? And I mean, I've never seen a computer in my life, right? And here, this lady that was listening over to someone's conversation talking about it basically got so excited that I got excited that I promised her I'm gonna go and do it. So I ended up my life finding a university that was offering it. And I'll just quickly end up with this. So I'll never forget it. I get there and they asked me, what would you like to major in? And I was like, major in? I've never, this is like, what? I don't know what that means. And then I looked at the list and I saw on the list there was this thing called programming. Now I used to do a lot of youth volunteer work, holiday clubs, where we do a lot of youth programs. And I said, wow. I'm like, so I told him, no, I can do programming. I've been doing programming for most probably 15 years, I told them. And they're like, really? But your results of your school don't say anything about programming. Like, no, 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 no. I did it during the holidays and weekends. Lots of programming experience. And they were very impressed. They said, okay. And then they asked me how many languages. And I thought, wow, I can speak 2 languages. And I'm thinking, maybe if I do a third language. So I said, I would like to do 3 languages. And that's really how I ended up in tech. Um, I then majored in a very technical stream, focusing on software engineering. And for anybody listening, if they understand the technology of back in the day, the languages, the computer programming languages that I had to learn was COBOL, C, and assembler. So for anybody that who has never touched a computer before, haven't seen a computer, it's quite an awakening. So that was basically my introduction to technology.
Wow, wow. So that was quite a very interesting story there, Marlon.
Oh, sorry, Kazeem. I just wanted to touch on something, and then
Uh,
we'll get into
Okay.
it. So, um, that's a fantastic story about it. And I'll have to tell you that I'm one of those that started with the Motorola 6800 and the
yes, yes,
Z8 Pascal
yes,
and C++ as well. So you do
yes.
have somebody that's been on a similar journey, but I'll let Kazeem dive into some of the
Uh,
cores of it. But that's the best introduction I've had in the show today on it.
Yes, exactly. So, Marlon, so let's get into the topic proper now. You've made a success already of our lab. I like to believe. I mean, our lab now is in 23 countries, right? 5 continents, right? So the our lab project is a very massive one. So I'd like to ask, Marlon, what inspired you to start the our lab project?
Yeah, so when RLabs was started, and RLab stands for Reconstructed Living Lab. Okay, so when the journey started, it wasn't like, oh, I must start a organization that's going to use technology. For me, the journey was all about when, like I've mentioned, I grew up in what I believe was peri-urban and an urban poor area. And I remember visiting my mom one day, and I saw a kid, age 8 years old, that was supposed to be in school, and this child was walking bare feet down the street. And I stopped him and I said, "Where are you going?" And this child said, "No, he's looking for a job." And I'm like, 8 years old, looking for a job. I'm like, "Where's your parents?" And the child said, "No, his dad is in prison and his mom is high on drugs." And this is exactly the same street where I grew up in. And and he then told me that the reason why he's looking for a job is he wants to buy bread for his 5-year-old sister who's at home, and he wants to buy him shoes so he can go to school. And my heart just broke out. And at that time, I literally was, I'd finished studying. I was a lecturer at university teaching technology. And now I find myself seeing a young person that has lost hope. And it was that then really kind of got me that, how do I use what I have to ensure that other young people, like that child's parents who were young adults, that they will make the right decisions. And at the time, it was really just maybe I should teach one person how to use a computer and how they can use it to share a story of hope. And that was really how RLab started. It wasn't a business plan or feasibility study. It was a need in the community. And I was just trying to do my best and say, how do I use what I have to address that one person's need? And I mean, of course, I helped the kid. But the big thing for me was, how do I equip young adults in the community, young people, so they can learn how to use a computer? Provide them with some digital skills. And that's really how it was started. That was where the inspiration came from. And eventually, and the name of the project at the time was called the Reconstructed Project. And that's why the name of the organization is Reconstructed Living Lab, short for RLabs.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a follow-up question, but you've touched on it just briefly. So I'm going to let Sam ask his own questions. I still have some more
Yeah.
questions to ask you. But after Sam now.
Excellent. And we've heard from a lot of entrepreneurs in different domains. And I myself went out and worked for myself for about 7 years. And I know that the dream starts off with, I want to create something, you're inspired, but we do come across challenges. So I wouldn't trivialize it. That's why I'm going to narrow it to say that if you had to pick, your top one challenge in establishing RLabs, what would that be, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Sam. And I mean, there's so many, right? I think, when we started this journey and it was starting with one person, equipping this one person with digital skills, right? And the problem was that one person thought they were getting free computer classes. So that one young man went to invite his friends to tell them, come for free computer classes. So the first challenge I had was that this reconstructed project was supposed to be a side hustle. It wasn't supposed to be an organization, but the community's demand for it kept on increasing. And that is why we formalized it and we set up this organization called RLabs. And even though we started 13 years ago, graduating our first class of people, I'll never forget, we graduated 14 people. Today we've graduated over 1.5 million people. So it was quite a massive move, that as a journey that we went as an organization, where we were really trying to instill hope in people, providing them with access to technology skills and using that skills to move into livelihoods. But the biggest challenge for us has been, one of the things about being African, and as you with all the work that we've done, with all the recognition, you still many times as a young entrepreneur, when you go into certain places, you still struggle with this whole thing of being an imposter, where all of a sudden it doesn't matter what your credentials is or what you've done. In some instances, people still don't think you are good enough. And I think the biggest challenge that I personally as an entrepreneur had to overcome was to realize that I have to take that position, not for myself, but I have to take that position for the generations that's coming after me. That another young person that's doing something very similar don't have to feel like an imposter, can take their place, know that they've earned their right at the table. And I think that must probably on a personal level been the biggest challenge for me as an entrepreneur, with RLabs and the journey that we've been on. And as an organization, because we are very much driven by culture, by how we do things, about making hope contagious, leading with love is one of our values. For us, the biggest challenge has always been, as we are ramping up and scaling out, how do we make sure that we maintain our culture in every part of the world where we are going? And I think that's probably been one of the big organizational challenges for us. But those are maybe kind of two challenges. The thing about the seat at the table and sometimes feeling as an imposter, having to overcome that, and organizationally retaining and maintaining the culture of your organization.
Absolutely fabulous answer because I'm an avid reader, and the current reread I am on is by an author called Matthew Said, and he talks about
Yeah,
this notion of rebel ideas and
yeah,
the areas that you've touched on, like you wanted to wear a suit and tie, right?
mm,
It's we are driven to be like clones rather
yes,
than rebels. So when we talk about diversity, a lot of people look at it in terms of color, but
mm,
having that divergence mindset, which means that if we all look the same, we all sound the same, we don't solve bigger problems. We end up focusing on those narrow ones. So um, the answer is, it resonates with me, and
mm,
I feel like we are learning so much from you, and we've got pockets of episodes to go. But this show is about getting to know you and some of
yeah,
those challenges, and also paving the way, as you
mm,
mentioned, right?
mm,
Leading with hope and love.
mm.
Fabulous. So, Kazeem, building on that, I know you had a number of questions, and Marlon keeps on doing what we love about our guests, answering it before
Yeah.
we can even ask them. So, what do you have next for Marlon?
Yeah, I want to also check with Marlon about the running of the organization, right? So
Mm.
the RLab project now, I mean, to run it at the scale that you're running it now would require some good amount of funding. And given that RLab is a non-profit company, so I want to check, how have you been able to come up with funds, to just keep the organization going?
Yeah. No, good question. So Odd Labs, when we started, the reason why we became a non-profit was because when we told people we're doing good in the community, they said, "Oh, you sound like a charity. You must be a non-profit." And I mean, I didn't know, right? You take the advice from the experts. But then later on, I realized, but as we are creating value in our community, that same value can actually be monetized for companies and private sector and public sector and development agencies who also are paying to do development. So our labs actually operates as a social enterprise. So we've got a non-profit arm that does all our impact work, and then we have a and maybe just summary, we do a lot of skills training to develop and build people's capacity. Then we use that capacity to allow people to build digital products and services to solve their own problems first, because who's the best, who best understands a problem than people who live in the problem. So instead of looking at people as being beneficiaries, we look at people as being problem experts. And then thirdly, we then look at some of those opportunities. We then allow them to build enterprise and ventures. And what we found was, as we were doing that to allow people to solve their own problems sustainably, companies and clients came to us and said, "Can you help us to build new products for our new markets?" So that is kind of how we've kind of been monetizing. So we run a agency that does investments, innovation as a service, and build technology products for clients, and also selling our own digital products. And secondly, our nonprofit really work with a lot of amazing partners around the world that does a lot of kind of development work with us. And of course, that comes through grants or donations.
Thank you very much, Marlon, for that response. So I believe, Sam, you still have some questions for Marlon.
I do have a question, or should I say, the beginning of
Mm,
my next series of questions for our next episode. And it's
mm,
to really narrow it down because I love the story from being told about it to you sharing how you studied it and then
mm,
learn others to get it. So, looking at that series, if I was somebody that was looking, right, to do what you were doing, because I now know the story, what would
mm,
be your advice for, what we will call the young entrepreneurs today
mm,
that are looking to establish a social enterprise? Because I think NGO can lose it a bit.
mm.
Um, so, how would you advise them by compressing all of this fun, great information?
Yeah, I think the first thing for young people listening would be, everything that you've been through, everything that you've gone through challenges, frustrations, was never there to break you, but is there to define who you can become. And for me, as someone that had no access to technology, always feeling sorry for myself, I then began to realize, but all those frustrations and experiences, there's a lot of other people that feel exactly the same way. So, how do I use that level of understanding that nobody else could have and use it to my advantage? And I would encourage them, if you're looking at starting a social enterprise, and it might seems like a big deal, my big advice to you is start something small. Even if you just start by changing one person's life, because if you really want to change the world, it starts by changing one person's world. And and leverage what you have. You don't have to go and wait for someone to give you money or resources. Leverage what you have. Start small, and by just starting, taking that first step is the way you start building momentum, because that's what it is. Once you have momentum, people will come and support you. But it's important that you just start.
Thank you very
Mm,
much for that.
mm,
And
mm.
Kazeem, any closing words before we wrap up?
It would be nice to just continue to go on and on with Marlon. I mean, the story is such a very inspiring and very exciting one. So I think it's really been awesome chatting with Marlon
Mm.
Parker on today's episode of Africa Talks Tech.
Kazeem, if what would do you have anything else for Marlon?
I would just want to leave Marlon with the parting word now. So if there's any
Mm.
last words from him before we say bye bye, and perhaps we'd like to have him on, on future episode of Africa Talks Tech. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my only last parting words would be for those listening, especially young people in Africa. The world needs you, right? Don't. It's not that you need the world. The world actually needs you. You are in the right place at the right time, and if ever there's a time for you to take that step into what you're destined to become, it's today. So whatever that dream is, whatever that aspiration is, go and get it. That's basically my parting words.
Sam, you want to say something too before we say bye bye?
Just a big thank you, Marlon. And one thing I am taking away is it is a huge impact to society, and
Yeah,
you've given us a great demonstration of it. And we will be sharing how to contact you as
yeah.
part of the captions for this episode. But for now, Kazim, I'll leave you to do the closeout statements because you say it best. And seeing that you're situated in Africa, the world needs you.
Yes, exactly. And I'll just, encourage more people, just like people would say, there's no better time to be in it, right? Just to use to use Marlon's phrase now than now. I mean, so it's such an awesome time to be in IT right now. So it's really been awesome once again having Marlon on this episode of Africa Talks Tech. So here's where we're going to close out on this episode. So do remember that you can rewatch this episode and other previous episode that we've had in the past on our YouTube channel. So it is Africa Talks Tech on YouTube. So on that note, therefore, so it's a bye bye from myself, from Sam and Marlon.
Thank
Bye
you so
bye.
much, everybody.